What is up, guys? It's your boy Ray coming at you live from somewhere. I wanted to chat with you today a little bit about my thoughts on first on what it means to run it back, and if not in this video, next time, what that means for me in terms of what I think the Nuggets should be doing this summer. For starters, I let's talk about like what running it back means. For some people, it's trading Cam Johnson and otherwise keeping the team together. For other people, it's paying everybody and going into the second apron for this team. To me, I think the Nuggets, and I will circle back to this, but I think the Nuggets let go of the idea of running it back when they let KCP and Michael Porter walk. Not because you need those individual players, because I don't think that's necessarily true, but more because you need those specific skill sets. And I think running it back, particularly in the context of a Murray Jokic team, runs through a set of guidelines about, say hi to the dog, guys. Hello. Uh, Runs through a set of guidelines about what those two need around them that has been forming for years, almost a decade at this point. You know, you're going back to some of the earliest players that benefit Jokic and Murray, not for themselves, but for the team, right? Talking about guys like Gary Harris, who covered up for a lot of Jamal's defensive deficiencies, took on the tougher defensive matchup in most cases, and left Jamal a lot more energy to do what he does while still being a willing three-point shooter and a guy who can run actions with Jokic, even in a more simplified fashion, but even so. I also think about guys like Kenneth Faried, who is not a perfect player in any sense of the word, but his athleticism and his vertical spacing out of the dunker spot was very. It did a lot for Jokic in terms of making his life easier and how he could face pressure from that secondary big, that help side defense, right? You can't really bring help in the same way when you have an easy lob threat on the other side of the rim. And I think, and you add in guys like Wilson Chandler and Danilo Gallinari into the mix, and you're talking about forwards who bring both size, and with that size coming, the ability to help Jokic on the boards, I think is a big thing. But also being easy targets for Jokic to work with from a kickout standpoint, and those two also being ready and willing three-point shooters. I think all of that is big, and I think that continued throughout the process when we moved on to guys like Paul Millsap and eventually Jeremy Grant, as almost like an upgrade, even more so than Wilson and Gallo. Those two are a lot more defensively minded and can cover up even more for Jokic's deficiencies on that end. Again, while continuing to be positive floor spacers from three, but also a lot of the time from the dunker spot and applying that pressure. And I think for Jamal, the ultimate pairing for him was KCP. That's how they won the championship. KCP was not only was he the shooter that the team needs as a whole, but also he covered up for a lot of Jamal's mobility limitations and navigating screens, because that makes it so Jamal doesn't have to be in as many actions as he might otherwise have to be. And he might be limited. KCP is certainly limited, and I've had criticisms of him that he doesn't do much more than take open threes occasionally on low volume. But despite being limited as a holistic player, his skill set, I think, was very much in line with what Murray and Jokic needed. And the same thing goes true for what eventually became of Jokic and his forward duo, in going from Paul Millsap and Jeremy Grant to Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter. Both of those guys, great floor spacers. Both of those guys, great rim finishers. And in that way, that ability to apply rim pressure from the weak side makes his life easier. But also because they have size, helps him in terms of doing the trench work. And I think that's really important. When you look at that championship run that the Nuggets had in 2023, Michael Porter and Aaron Gordon combined for 14 rebounds a game in that playoff run. It's not that Cam Johnson is a bad player intrinsically, but when you're talking about the skill sets that are required, Aaron, I think the version of him in 2026 is not the version of who he was in 2023, and he's not carrying the physical burdens that he used to. And even then, it was more Michael Porter doing the rebounding than Aaron. Aaron, I think, averaged 6 boards a game in that run. But Cam pulls down 3 a game. And I'm not saying that makes him a bad player, but I'm saying it's still critical that you have those skill sets around Jokic and Murray if you're going to be planning around Jokic and Murray. There is an idea, I think, that is flowing around that the Nuggets can, without overhauling the roster, change who they are as a team in a similar way that the Knicks were able to. And I think there's a key difference there that I think makes that a little bit more untenable, or maybe 2 differences. The first is that, unfortunately, while Jamal Murray has been great in the context of the 2-man game and setting that up in the creation of that, he optimizes what that can be. When he has all the tools around him, all the things that I've talked about, those two as a tandem, forwards that can shoot, space the floor, finish at the rim, rebound, contribute in the trench work, and a guard next to him that can take off some of the defensive burden while not having any hesitant shooters on the court. It might be possible even that guys can do more than that they can put the ball on the floor a little bit, but it is not helpful to the 2-man game and to Jokic and Murray if KCP was going to run point and start trying to create things on his own. And as much as we like Cam Johnson, I think he's a good player. I don't think it's particularly helpful for Jokic and Murray now that he can do a little bit more on his own. As much as that is nice, it's more important that he excels as a floor spacer for those two. It might be good for himself, right? And it might be an opportunity for him to shine when the teams are over leveraged on Jokic and Murray. But at the end of the day, they need floor spacers. Circling back to Murray, the differences I think between Murray and Brunson is I think Murray just really struggles if you're going to move to a more egalitarian offense. Jamal has always struggled a lot playing off ball. I know he came into the league with that kind of billing. Excuse the train. I know he came into the league with that kind of billing. However, in the NBA, I think he has had a tendency to disengage when he's not on ball. You think about the kind of players who are elite in that way. It's Steph Curry, right? And one of the things that is so impressive about him doing what he does, him coming off of all those screens, is that he has the cardio capacity to do all that. And I'm going to be honest, even though this is the best in shape we've seen, the best in shape season we've seen from him, he just doesn't. I don't think he has that capacity. I don't think it's not the best use of his talents to try to turn him into that player. I would love to be surprised, and maybe this is something that Adelman can bring out of him and bring out of the team and bring in a new kind of focus. But I'm skeptical. I'm also skeptical not just because of his physical tendencies, but because of the financial situation that they're in. The reality is, if you're going to turn Jamal Murray into a lower volume option and you're going to take the ball out of his hands and you're going to bring in another point guard and you're going to move him to the two, you don't, that's not a $15 million a year player then at that point. You can't spend, you can't have a guy who is making just about what Jokic is and say, well, he's just another one of the guys. The financial makeup of the team is such that as long as Jamal Murray is a nugget, I think the team has to run through them, because I don't know how you can afford the surrounding cast that's going to make Jamal Murray being a lower volume scorer tenable. That's just my opinion. I know we in the community discuss a lot about letting guys go and what that means. And I myself on this channel have discussed about how I think going from Michael Porter to Cam Johnson is a downgrade. Little train action. And to me, maybe you don't need to have every player be the exact same guy, because the Nuggets have gone through multiple iterations of the process of the formula, is what I'm just going to call it, the formula. 2 large forwards, a guard who can cover up for Murray's defensive limitations, and have all 3 of them be positive floor spacers. Even if you don't have those players, even if you don't have Michael Porter, even if you don't have KCP, I think it's important to think about the skill sets. If you're going to run it back and you're going to continue the build around Murray and Jokic, I think the 2-man game has to be unstoppable. And I think Denver still needs to be able to go to the 2-man game. And for that to happen, you need guys with those skill sets. You can't have a Christian Braun who is a good defender, but because of his but he's not the navigator of screens. And you can do this with a physicality too, right? Maybe instead of going around screens, you're just blowing them up. Okay, cool. And you're just not giving the switches. Cool. And I'm not saying Cam can't be a good player for Denver, but if he's going to be in that Michael Porter role, he needs to be more of a shooter and less of a creator. That's just the reality of how the 2-man game functions, what they need to succeed. Because otherwise, teams are going to settle for letting Christian and Cam, let them cook. I think teams will be happy to let them cook and put all their attention on Murray and Jokic, and to some degree Aaron, and live with the results. I'm going to cut this video here, but I hope you'll have a great day. Next time we will talk about more specifics about the offseason, and everyone has a plan. I do too. We'll get into that. Have a great day.